Marcus Thompson stood at attention outside Buckingham Palace, his red uniform pristine under the morning sun. The tourists snapped photos while he remained motionless, a living statue protecting the crown. At 32, Marcus had spent 8 years as a Queen's Guard, and most people saw him as nothing more than a ceremonial decoration. What they didn't know was that before the red coat and bearskin hat, Marcus had been Sergeant Major Thompson of the 22nd Special Air Service Regiment. For 6 years, he had operated in the shadows across 3 continents, earning a reputation that made hardened soldiers whisper his name with respect. But that life was behind him now, buried beneath layers of protocol and pageantry. The morning shift ended, and Marcus made his way to the barracks. His fellow guards chatted about weekend plans, but Marcus kept to himself. He had learned long ago that some stories were better left untold. The transition from elite special forces to ceremonial duties hadn't been easy, but it was necessary. Too many missions, too many close calls, and too many ghosts that followed him home. "Thompson," called out Sergeant Davies, the shift supervisor. "Got a moment?" Marcus nodded and followed Davies to his office. The older man had been with the guards for 15 years and took pride in maintaining discipline. "Listen, the lads are planning a team-building exercise this Saturday," Davies explained. "There's a new shooting range that opened in Surrey. Civilian operation, but they've got military-grade facilities. Thought it might be good for morale." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Shooting range? Nothing too serious, just some friendly competition. You know how it is. The public thinks we're just for show. Might be good to remind ourselves we're still soldiers." Davies leaned back in his chair. "You interested?" The invitation surprised Marcus. He rarely participated in group activities, preferring to spend his free time reading or taking long walks through Hyde Park. But something about the challenge intrigued him. It had been months since he'd held a proper rifle. "I'll think about it," Marcus replied. "Good man. Details are on the notice board if you change your mind." That evening, Marcus sat in his small apartment near the barracks. The walls were bare except for a single photograph. His old SAS unit, after a successful mission in Afghanistan. 12 men, who had trusted each other with their lives. Half of them were gone now, victims of war or time. He picked up the photo and studied the faces. There was Jenkins, the explosives expert who could disarm a bomb while telling jokes. Patterson, the communications specialist who spoke 7 languages fluently. And there was Marcus himself, younger and harder, holding a rifle that had become an extension of his own body. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his sister, Sarah, calling from Manchester. "How's the Queen treating you?" she joked, as she always did. "Same as yesterday," Marcus replied with a small smile. Sarah was the only family he had left, and one of the few people who knew about his military background. "You sound tired, Marcus. Are you taking care of yourself?" "I'm fine. Just thinking about some things." "Good things, I hope?" Marcus looked at the photograph again. "Maybe. The guards are doing a shooting exercise this weekend. That sounds normal for you lot. Are you going?" "Haven't decided yet." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You know, Marcus, it's been 3 years since you left the regiment. Maybe it's time to stop hiding from who you are." After the call ended, Marcus sat in the growing darkness. Sarah was right. As usual. He had been hiding. Not just from his past, but from himself. The red uniform had become a shield, protecting him from the memories and expectations that came with his real identity. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly. Typical London weather. Marcus found himself at the Surrey shooting range despite his earlier hesitations. The facility was impressive. A modern building with multiple indoor ranges and state-of-the-art equipment, a far cry from the makeshift ranges he'd used in hostile territory. 10 of his fellow guards had made the trip, along with Sergeant Davies. They were greeted by the range owner, a former Army captain named Williams, who had opened the facility after retiring from active duty. "Welcome to Surrey Precision," Williams announced. "We've got everything from basic pistol ranges to long-distance rifle courses. What's your preference?" "Let's start with something simple," suggested Davies. "Maybe pistol work at 25 meters?" The group moved to the indoor pistol range. Marcus watched as his colleagues prepared their weapons. Standard Glock 17 seconds that the range provided. Most of the guards had basic firearms training, enough to handle security situations, but nothing specialized. Guard Collins went first, a young man from Liverpool who had joined the service straight from school. His shots scattered across the target, with only 3 hitting the scoring rings. He shrugged good-naturedly as the others ribbed him about his accuracy. "Never was much good with guns," Collins admitted. "Good thing we mostly just stand around looking pretty." Next was Williams, an older guard from Wales with steady hands from his previous career as a mechanic. He managed to group his shots better, scoring respectable hits in the outer rings of the target. One by one, each guard took their turn. The results were mixed, but generally what Marcus expected from soldiers whose primary job involved ceremony rather than combat. Laughter and friendly insults filled the range as scores were compared and excuses were made. "Your turn, Thompson," called out Davies. Marcus stepped forward and picked up the pistol. The weight felt familiar in his hands, muscle memory awakening after months of dormancy. He checked the weapon with practiced efficiency, his movements automatic and precise. "Steady on, Thompson," joked Collins. "You're making the rest of us look bad just by holding it properly." Marcus said nothing as he faced the target. The chatter behind him faded into background noise. His breathing slowed, and his vision narrowed to the front sight post and the black circle 25 meters away. This was a different Marcus than the silent sentinel who stood guard at the palace. This was the operative who had eliminated targets at distances that would make snipers envious. The first shot surprised even him. Dead center, a perfect bullseye. The range fell silent. "Lucky shot," someone muttered. Marcus fired again. Another bullseye, so close to the first hole that it was barely distinguishable. Then a third, fourth, and fifth. When the smoke cleared, all 10 rounds had created a single ragged hole in the center of the target. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Marcus set down the pistol and turned to face his colleagues, who were staring at him with expressions ranging from amazement to suspicion. "Jesus Christ, Thompson," whispered Williams. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Before Marcus could answer, the range owner Williams appeared at his shoulder, studying the target with professional interest. "That's some impressive shooting," the ex-captain said. "Mind if I ask about your background?" Marcus felt the familiar urge to deflect, to make up a story about hunting with his grandfather or lucky genes. But Sarah's words echoed in his mind. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. "I had some training," he said simply. "What kind of training?" pressed Davies, his tone more serious now. Marcus met his supervisor's eyes. "The kind you don't talk about." The implication hung in the air. Davies was no fool. He recognized the signs of specialized military training when he saw them. The way Marcus handled the weapon, his stance, the clinical precision of his shooting. This wasn't the work of a weekend warrior. "Well," Davies said finally, clearing his throat, "perhaps we should try something more challenging." Range owner Williams nodded eagerly. "We've got a long-range rifle course out back. Up to 300 meters, variable wind conditions. Interested?" The group moved outside to the rifle range. The drizzle had stopped, but a steady breeze was making the range flags dance. Williams provided each guard with a bolt-action rifle and ammunition, explaining the basics of long-distance shooting. "Wind's the killer out here," he told them. "You've got to read the conditions and adjust accordingly. These rifles are zeroed for 100 meters, so you'll need to compensate for drop at longer distances." The targets were set at 100, 200, and 300 meters. White paper silhouettes that looked impossibly small at the furthest distance. Most civilians would struggle to hit them at all, let alone score consistent hits. Collins went first again, managing to hit the 100-meter target twice out of 5 shots. The others followed with similar results, adequate for basic marksmanship, but nothing exceptional. When Marcus's turn came, he approached the rifle with the same methodical precision he had shown with the pistol. But this time, he took longer to prepare. He studied the wind flags, noting the direction and intensity of the breeze. He adjusted the scope elevation for the longer distances. Most importantly, he settled into a shooting position that his colleagues had never seen before. Instead of the standard prone position taught in basic training, Marcus adopted the stance he had perfected during countless hours on military ranges. His body became a stable platform, his breathing controlled to the point where his heartbeat was the only movement. The first shot rang out, and Marcus immediately worked the bolt to chamber another round. He fired again within seconds, then a third time. The rapid succession surprised everyone watching. They had expected him to take his time between shots like the others. "Targets," called Williams. The results were devastating. At 100 meters, 3 perfect hits in the center scoring ring. At 200 meters, the same result. But it was the 300-meter target that caused the real stir. 3 hits, grouped so tightly they could have been covered by a playing card, all in the highest scoring zone. In variable wind conditions, with an unfamiliar rifle, Marcus had just demonstrated shooting skills that most professional marksmen would envy. "That's impossible," breathed Collins. The wind was shifting the whole time. Marcus stood up and handed the rifle back to Williams. "Wind's predictable if you know what to look for." Davies approached him slowly, his expression a mixture of respect and confusion. "Thompson, I think we need to have a talk." But before Marcus could respond, Williams, the range owner, was examining the targets with growing excitement. "I've never seen shooting like this," he said, shaking his head. "Sir, I don't mean to pry, but what unit were you with?" The question that Marcus had been dreading finally came. His colleagues gathered around, waiting for an answer that would explain the impossible display of marksmanship they had just witnessed. Marcus looked at each face in turn. These were good men, soldiers in their own right, even if their duties had become more ceremonial than combat-oriented. They deserved the truth, or at least part of it. 22nd SAS Regiment, he said quietly, sniper specialist. The words hit the group like a physical blow. The Special Air Service was legendary, even among military circles. To claim membership was to claim a place among the elite of the elite. "Bloody hell," whispered Williams the guard. "Your regiment?" Marcus nodded once, then turned to leave. But Davies caught his arm. "Wait," the sergeant said. "If you're SAS, what are you doing with us? Why the Palace Guard?" It was a fair question, one that Marcus had asked himself many times. The answer was complicated, involving classified operations, psychological evaluations, and decisions made in the aftermath of missions that had pushed him beyond his limits. "Sometimes you need a quiet posting," Marcus said simply. "Somewhere to remember what you're protecting." He left them standing there, processing the revelation that their quiet colleague was one of the most dangerous men in the British military. The drive back to London passed in silence, each guard lost in their own thoughts about the man they thought they knew. For Marcus, the day had been both liberating and troubling. The skills were still there, sharp as ever, but using them again had awakened something he had tried to bury: the precision, the focus, the deadly calm that had made him legendary in special operations circles. As he changed out of his civilian clothes and back into his uniform, Marcus caught his reflection in the mirror. The red coat and bearskin hat looked different now, less like a costume and more like camouflage. He was still hiding, but perhaps for different reasons than before. The phone rang again. Sarah, checking on his day. "How was the shooting?" she asked. Marcus smiled slightly. "Complicated. Good complicated or bad complicated? I'm not sure yet, but I think some things are about to change." That evening, as Marcus walked his usual route through Hyde Park, he noticed details he had missed before. Escape routes, vantage points, potential threats. The operative's mind was reasserting itself, analyzing and cataloging information with automatic precision. He paused by the Serpentine Lake, watching the ducks paddle through the still water. For 3 years, he had been Marcus Thompson, Queen's Guard, a man with no past, no complications, no reputation to live up to. But that illusion was shattered now. Word would spread through the guards, then through the broader military community. Soon, everyone would know that Sergeant Major Marcus Thompson, of the SAS, was standing watch at Buckingham Palace. The question was, what would happen next? As he walked back to his apartment, Marcus felt a familiar sensation. The feeling of being watched. Old instincts kicked in, and he casually checked his surroundings. Nothing obvious, but the feeling persisted. In his former life, such instincts had kept him alive. Tonight, they reminded him that some shadows never fully disappeared. Unknown to Marcus, his performance at the range had indeed attracted attention. Williams, the range owner, had made several phone calls after the guards departed, speaking in hushed tones to contacts in military and government circles. The name Marcus Thompson was being passed up chains of command, triggering inquiries and raising questions. The quiet guard's secret was out, but the real consequences were only just beginning. Back in his apartment, Marcus sat with the photograph of his old unit once more. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, and possibly new complications. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt like himself again. The question was whether that was a good thing or a dangerous development. The story of Marcus Thompson, the Royal Guard with the deadliest secret, was about to enter its next chapter. And like all good stories involving the SAS, it was far from over. I followed proper procedures, sir. The activity was approved through Sergeant Davies. Harrison waved dismissively. The shooting exercise isn't the issue, Thompson. The issue is that I've been commanding the Queen's Guard for 8 years. And I'm just now learning that one of my men is former regiment. 2. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus had known this moment would come eventually, but he had hoped for more time to prepare. Your service record shows a transfer from General Infantry 3 years ago. Harrison continued. Clean record, exemplary conduct. Nothing remarkable. Either someone made a very significant clerical error, or there are aspects of your background that have been deliberately obscured. Marcus remained silent. He had signed enough non-disclosure agreements during his SAS career to know when speaking would only create more problems. I've been in contact with Sterling Lines, Harrison said, referring to the SAS headquarters in Hereford. Interesting conversations. Your former commanding officer sends his regards, by the way. That got Marcus's attention. Colonel Davies at Sterling Lines had been his mentor and friend, one of the few people who understood why Marcus had requested a transfer to ceremonial duties. He tells me you were one of their best, Harrison continued. Sniper specialist, counter-terrorism expert, multiple deployments in classified operations, distinguished service record, commendations I'm not cleared to hear about, and a reputation that apparently makes grown men nervous. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair. That was a different life, sir. Was it? Because from what I hear, those skills don't just disappear. Harrison leaned back in his chair. The question is, why are those skills standing guard outside Buckingham Palace? It was a fair question, one that deserved an honest answer. Marcus had rehearsed explanations for this moment. But sitting across from Harrison, he found himself wanting to tell the truth. Sometimes the job gets to you, Marcus said slowly. After a while, you start questioning whether what you're doing is making things better or just creating new problems. I needed something different, something that reminded me what I was fighting for. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. Protecting the monarchy is hardly a step down from special operations. It's not about the importance of the job, sir. It's about the clarity. When I stand guard, I know exactly what I'm protecting and why. There's no ambiguity, no moral gray areas, just duty. And you've been content with that for 3 years? Marcus hesitated. Saturday's shooting demonstration had awakened something he thought he had successfully buried: the precision, the focus, the adrenaline rush of perfect execution. He said finally. Harrison studied him for a long moment before opening a file folder on his desk. Well, it appears that contentment may be about to change. I've received a request for your services. Marcus felt his blood chill. Requests for SAS personnel usually meant trouble somewhere in the world that required special attention. Nothing operational, Harrison added quickly, seeing Marcus's expression. Training request. There's a situation developing that requires someone with your particular expertise. What kind of situation? Harrison hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. There have been some concerning developments in the private security sector. High-end firms hiring former military personnel for questionable purposes. The government wants to understand what we're dealing with. Marcus frowned. Private military contractors were nothing new. But if the government was concerned enough to pull in SAS resources, something serious was happening. They want you to go undercover, Harrison continued. Your current position provides perfect cover. A ceremonial guard with hidden special forces training. Exactly the kind of recruit these firms are looking for. Sir, with respect, I left that world for a reason. I understand, and this is entirely voluntary. But the request comes from very high levels, Thompson. People who understand both your capabilities and your current situation. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. Going back to operational work, even temporarily, would mean reopening doors he had deliberately closed, but it would also mean using his skills for something meaningful again. What would be required? Harrison smiled slightly, recognizing the shift in Marcus's tone. Preliminary assessment only. Attend a recruitment event, gauge their capabilities, report back. Low risk, minimal exposure. When? This weekend, there's a gathering at an estate in the Cotswolds. Former military personnel only, invitation-only event. We've arranged for you to receive an invitation through back channels. Marcus nodded slowly. It sounded straightforward enough, but his experience had taught him that simple missions rarely stayed simple. I'll need to maintain my guard duties, he said. Any operational work has to be completely separate from my official position. Of course, as far as anyone knows, you're just taking some weekend leave. They discussed the details for another 30 minutes. The gathering was being organized by something called Blackwood Security, a firm that had recently appeared on government radar due to their aggressive recruitment of elite military personnel. The invitation would arrive through a former regiment colleague who now worked in the private sector. As the meeting concluded, Harrison stood and extended his hand. For what it's worth, Thompson, I'm glad to know we have someone of your caliber watching over us. The monarchy is fortunate to have you. Walking back to his post, Marcus felt the familiar weight of operational responsibility settling on his shoulders. It had been 3 years since he had felt that particular burden, and he wasn't sure he had missed it. The afternoon passed slowly. Tourists took their pictures while Marcus stood motionless, but his mind was racing with possibilities and concerns. Going undercover would mean lying again, assuming false identities, manipulating people for information. All the skills that had made him effective in the regiment, but also the ones that had ultimately driven him away. That evening, Marcus called Sarah to cancel their usual weekly dinner. Work complications? She asked. Something like that. I might be traveling this weekend. Marcus, you're being evasive. That usually means trouble. She knew him too well. Sarah had been his anchor during the difficult transition from special forces to civilian life. The one person who could read his moods and concerns without explanation. Just some extra duties. Nothing dangerous. Promise me that. Promise me you're not doing anything dangerous. Marcus stared at his reflection in the apartment window. I promise I'll be careful. It wasn't quite the same thing, and Sarah's silence suggested she knew it. Wednesday brought the invitation, delivered to his apartment by courier. Expensive paper, embossed letterhead, carefully crafted language that spoke of exclusive opportunities for elite military professionals. The return address was a London office, but Marcus recognized the sophisticated formatting of a professional intelligence operation. The gathering would take place at Greystone Manor, a country estate that had been converted into a private conference facility. 2 days of presentations, networking, and evaluation. Attendees were required to provide detailed military service records and undergo background checks that would have impressed government agencies. Marcus spent the rest of the week researching Blackwood Security through open sources. On the surface, they appeared legitimate. A high-end firm providing security consulting for multinational corporations and wealthy individuals. But there were gaps in their public information that suggested hidden depths. Friday afternoon, as he prepared for the weekend mission, Marcus found himself thinking about his conversation with Harrison. The colonel had been right about one thing. The skills didn't just disappear. Saturday's shooting demonstration had proven that his operational abilities were intact, perhaps even sharper than before. 3 years of ceremonial duty had given him patience and discipline he hadn't possessed during his active service days. The question was whether those enhanced skills were a blessing or a curse. Saturday morning, Marcus drove his personal car to the Cotswolds, leaving behind the red uniform and bearskin hat for civilian clothes that had been carefully selected to project the right image. Dark jeans, leather jacket, subtle signs of military bearing without obvious identification. Greystone Manor was impressive, a Georgian country house set on hundreds of acres of rolling hills. Luxury vehicles filled the parking area, and well-dressed men moved between the buildings with the confident bearing of professional soldiers. Marcus registered at the main desk, providing identification and service records that had been carefully edited to hide his SAS background, while emphasizing his marksmanship skills and guard service. The receptionist was efficient and professional, but Marcus noticed the subtle security cameras and the way certain staff members carried themselves. "Mr. Thompson," said a voice behind him. "Welcome to Greystone." Marcus turned to find a tall man in an expensive suit approaching with an extended hand. Mid-40s, graying temples, the kind of understated confidence that came from years of command authority. "James Blackwood," the man introduced himself. "I run this little operation. I understand you're currently with the Queen's Guard?" "That's correct," Marcus replied, shaking the offered hand. Blackwood's grip was firm and confident, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who missed very little. "Excellent. We always appreciate men who understand the value of discipline and tradition. Though I suspect there might be more to your background than ceremonial duties." It was a fishing expedition, professionally done. Marcus had expected it. "Infantry before the Guard," he said. "Some specialized training here and there." "Too," Blackwood smiled. "I'm sure. Well, you'll find this weekend quite educational. We have some interesting opportunities for men with the right skills and discretion." The first presentation took place in a converted ballroom filled with perhaps 50 former military personnel. The topics were standard, private security fare, threat assessment, executive protection, international consulting. But Marcus noticed details that suggested more complex operations. References to gray zone activities, discussions of legal frameworks in different jurisdictions, and careful emphasis on operational security. During the lunch break, Marcus mingled with other attendees. The mix was impressive. Former SAS, Paras, Royal Marines, even a few Americans who claimed Delta Force backgrounds. All of them were evaluating each other as much as they were listening to presentations. "Interesting crowd," commented a voice beside him. Marcus turned to find a compact man with scarred hands and the alert eyes of someone who had seen serious combat. "Dave Morrison," the man introduced himself. "Former Green Jacket." "You?" "Marcus Thompson. Queen's Guard currently, infantry before that." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Queen's Guard? That's different. What brings you here?" "Curious about opportunities," Marcus replied honestly. "Ceremonial duty has its attractions, but it doesn't exactly use all your skills." "I hear that. Though I suspect the Guard selection process is tougher than most people think." It was another probe, more subtle than Blackwood's but equally designed to elicit information. Marcus was beginning to understand that this gathering was as much about assessment as recruitment. The afternoon sessions were more revealing. Discussions of international operations, client requirements that pushed legal boundaries, and compensation packages that would tempt any soldier facing uncertain post-military career prospects. But it was the final presentation that caught Marcus's attention. Blackwood himself took the stage to discuss what he called special projects. Operations requiring exceptional skill sets and absolute discretion. "Gentlemen," Blackwood began, "traditional security work is evolving. Our clients face threats that require innovative solutions. Sometimes those solutions must operate in spaces where conventional security firms cannot function." The language was careful, but the implications were clear. Blackwood Security wasn't just providing bodyguards and consultation. They were offering services that existed in the gray areas between legal and illegal, between corporate security and intelligence operations. For the right individuals, Blackwood continued, we offer opportunities to use your specialized training in ways that matter. Protecting vital interests, gathering critical intelligence, neutralizing specific threats. The work is challenging, the compensation is exceptional, and the impact is significant. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. This wasn't just private security. It was private warfare, conducted by former military personnel with government-level skills, but without government oversight. During the evening social event, Marcus found himself in conversation with several other attendees who seemed equally intrigued and concerned by the day's presentations. The alcohol flowed freely, and tongues began to loosen. The money's tempting, admitted a former para named Jenkins. But some of this sounds like the kind of work that could land you in a foreign prison. Some of this, or worse, added Morrison. Blackwood's talking about operations that governments can't officially conduct. That makes us disposable assets. Marcus listened carefully, filing away names and details. It was becoming clear that Blackwood Security was exactly the kind of organization that would concern government oversight committees. Later that evening, as Marcus returned to his assigned room, he noticed increased security presence around the manor. Professional surveillance. Discreet, but thorough. Whatever Blackwood was really up to, he was taking operational security seriously. The second day brought more detailed discussions of specific operations. Blackwood presented case studies that, while anonymized, clearly described sophisticated intelligence gathering and direct action missions conducted on behalf of unnamed clients. Corporate espionage is just the beginning, he explained to a smaller group of selected attendees. Our clients require solutions to problems that traditional legal frameworks cannot address. Hostile takeovers become literal. Competitor advantages are neutralized through direct action. Market manipulation takes on entirely new meanings. Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. The privatization of capabilities that had previously been exclusive to national intelligence services. Ex-military personnel with top-level training were being recruited to conduct operations that would be illegal if performed by government agencies. But it was during the final session that things took a dangerous turn. Mr. Thompson, Blackwood called out as the group prepared to disperse. Could I have a word? Marcus followed Blackwood to a private office, his operational instincts on high alert. The room was elegantly appointed but clearly served as more than decoration. Subtle electronic countermeasures, reinforced walls, and furniture positioned to provide tactical advantages. Your background check revealed some interesting gaps. Blackwood began without preamble. Infantry service that doesn't quite match standard patterns, specialized training that isn't clearly defined, and current placement that seems unusual for someone with your apparent capabilities. Marcus kept his expression neutral. Not sure what you mean. I think you do. Blackwood opened a file on his desk. We've done some additional research since yesterday. Your marksmanship demonstration last weekend was quite impressive, according to our sources. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Somehow, Blackwood had learned about the shooting range incident. That level of intelligence gathering suggested resources and connections that went far beyond a typical private security firm. I'm not sure what relevance that has, Marcus said carefully. Blackwood smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Mr. Thompson, we both know you're not just a ceremonial guard. The question is, what are you really? And who sent you here? The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus's cover was blown, and he was alone in hostile territory with people who clearly had significant intelligence capabilities. His next words would determine whether he walked out of Greystone Manor or became a permanent resident. Marcus studied Blackwood's face for several seconds, weighing his options. The man across the desk was clearly intelligent and well-informed, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he might respect directness more than continued deception. You're fishing, Marcus said finally. If you knew who I really was, you wouldn't be asking questions. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Fair enough. But let's assume I know enough to be concerned. Your service record has been scrubbed by professionals. Your current posting is highly unusual for someone with your apparent skill set, and your appearance here raises questions about coincidence versus design. Maybe I'm just looking for better paying work. Maybe. Or maybe you're here because someone wants to know what Blackwood Security is really doing. Blackwood stood and walked to the window overlooking the manor grounds. The private military industry has attracted significant government attention lately. Agencies are concerned about former Special Forces personnel operating outside official oversight. Marcus remained silent, but his mind was racing through contingency plans. The office had one main entrance, windows that faced a 20-foot drop, and almost certainly electronic surveillance. If this conversation went wrong, his options would be limited. Here's what I think, Blackwood continued, turning back to face Marcus. I think you're exactly who you claim to be. A highly trained soldier who's found himself in a ceremonial role that doesn't challenge his abilities. I think you're here because you're curious about alternatives. But I also think someone suggested you attend this gathering, and that someone wants to know what you learned. It was an accurate assessment, and Marcus found himself respecting Blackwood's analytical skills, even as he recognized the danger they represented. The question is, Blackwood said, settling back into his chair, what we do about that? You could let me leave and pretend this conversation never happened. I could, but that would waste an opportunity. Blackwood opened the file again and pulled out several photographs. These were taken at various locations over the past 6 months: Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, Myanmar, different conflicts, different clients, but all involving private military operators conducting missions that official forces couldn't or wouldn't attempt. Marcus studied the images, professional surveillance photos showing Western operatives in combat situations, advanced equipment being deployed in primitive settings, and coordination that suggested significant resources and planning. The modern world is complicated, Blackwood explained. Governments have legal constraints that prevent them from addressing certain threats. Corporations face challenges that traditional security cannot handle. Wealthy individuals require protection from enemies that law enforcement cannot touch. We provide solutions. Illegal solutions. Necessary solutions. The legal framework hasn't kept pace with reality. Blackwood gathered the photographs and returned them to the file. But I'm not trying to recruit you for operational work, Mr. Thompson. I have something different in mind. Marcus waited, knowing that whatever came next would determine whether he walked out of this room as himself or as someone else entirely. I want you to work for me as yourself, Blackwood said. A Queen's Guard with Special Forces background who can provide unique insights into security challenges facing high-value targets. Your current position gives you access to protocols and procedures that would be invaluable to our clients. It was a clever approach. Instead of asking Marcus to betray his government role, Blackwood was suggesting he use it as a qualification for private consulting work. I'm not interested in selling official secrets, Marcus said firmly. Of course not. I'm talking about legitimate consulting based on your professional expertise. Royal protection protocols that could be adapted for corporate executives. Threat assessment techniques developed through government service. Training methodologies proven in elite military units. Respect. Crease me. Marcus could see the appeal of Blackwood's offer. It would allow him to use his skills while maintaining his official position, provide additional income, and potentially give him insight into Blackwood's real operations. But it would also make him complicit in whatever Blackwood Security was actually doing. I need time to think about it, Marcus said. Of course. But I should mention that several of your former colleagues have already joined our consulting roster. Blackwood pulled out another file. Perhaps you know some of them? No. The names hit Marcus like physical blows. Jenkins from his old unit. The explosives expert who supposedly died in Afghanistan. Patterson, the communications specialist, who had vanished during a classified operation in Syria. 4 other names from his SAS squadron, all officially listed as killed in action or missing in operation. Surprised? Blackwood asked, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. These men are dead. Officially, yes. In reality, they found their government service somewhat limiting. We offered them opportunities to continue using their skills in more flexible environments. Marcus felt the world shifting around him. If Blackwood was telling the truth, then half his old unit was still alive and working for a private military organization that operated outside legal constraints. "I'd like to see them," Marcus said quietly. "That can be arranged. In fact, they're here today." Jenkins has been particularly interested in reconnecting with old friends. Blackwood pressed a button on his desk intercom. "Please ask Mr. Jenkins to join us." The wait seemed endless. Marcus tried to process the implications of what he was hearing. If his old comrades were alive and working for Blackwood, then their official deaths had been elaborate cover stories. But why? And what had they been doing for the past 3 years? The office door opened, and a man Marcus thought he would never see again walked into the room. "Hello, Marcus," said the ghost of Michael Jenkins. He looked older, harder, but unmistakably alive. The scars on his hands were familiar, the result of a training accident during their second year together. But there was something different in his eyes. A coldness that hadn't been there during their military service. "Mike," Marcus managed, "we thought you were dead." "The IED in Helmand Province, carefully staged," Jenkins replied, settling into a chair beside Marcus. "Along with my recruitment into Blackwood's organization. Turns out there are advantages to being officially dead." "What advantages?" Jenkins and Blackwood exchanged glances before Jenkins continued. "Complete operational freedom. No government oversight, no legal constraints, no accountability except to our clients. We can do the work that needs to be done without worrying about political consequences or media attention." Marcus felt sick. These were men he had trusted with his life, soldiers he had considered brothers. To discover they were alive was miraculous. To learn they had become mercenaries was devastating. "Marcus," Jenkins said, leaning forward, "you know better than anyone how frustrating it was to operate under government rules. Half our missions failed because of legal restrictions and political considerations. Here, we can actually make a difference. By working for the highest bidder, by working for people who understand that sometimes violence is the only solution to complex problems." Jenkins's voice carried an edge of conviction that Marcus found disturbing. Corporations under attack from competitors who use illegal methods. Governments that need deniable operations conducted by non-official personnel. Individuals threatened by enemies that law enforcement cannot touch. Blackwood watched the exchange with professional interest. "Mr. Thompson, I understand this is a lot to process. Perhaps you'd like to speak with some of the other team members? Patterson is particularly excited about the technological resources we can provide." "Patterson's alive too?" "Very much so. In fact, most of your old unit has found their way to us eventually. Special Forces training is too valuable to waste on ceremonial duties." The implication was clear. Marcus was being recruited not just for his skills, but to complete the collection of his former unit. The bonds of brotherhood that had held them together in military service were being used as recruitment tools for private warfare. "I want to see them," Marcus said. "All of them." "Excellent. There's a private dining room where they're waiting. This evening, after the other attendees have departed." Tron Steaks, this evening. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Marcus attended the final presentations and networking sessions, but his mind was consumed by the revelation that his dead comrades were alive and working for Blackwood Security. When evening arrived, he found himself in an elegant dining room with 6 men he had thought were gone forever. The reunion was surreal. Ghosts made flesh, sitting around a table laden with expensive food and wine, discussing operations that sounded like they belonged in spy novels. The Myanmar job was particularly satisfying, Patterson was explaining. Local warlord was disrupting our client's mining operations. 3-day operation, surgical precision, problem solved. "Sounds like assassination," Marcus observed. "Targeted elimination of a legitimate threat," corrected Williams, another former teammate. The client had tried legal channels, government intervention, everything. Sometimes, you have to cut through the red tape. Marcus listened as his old brothers-in-arms described operations that ranged from corporate espionage to direct military action. Each story was told with professional pride, but also with a casual disregard for legal and ethical boundaries that would have been unthinkable during their military service. "Marcus," Jenkins said during a lull in the conversation, "you're being very quiet. What do you think of all this?" The question hung in the air. 6 pairs of eyes studied Marcus's face, waiting for his response. These were men who had shared foxholes and firefights with him, who had trusted him with their lives and secrets, but they were also men who had chosen to fake their deaths and become private soldiers. "I think it's complicated," Marcus said finally. "Part of me is thrilled that you're all alive. But part of me wonders what happened to the soldiers I knew." "We're the same men," insisted Patterson, "just with better resources and clearer objectives." "Are you?" "Because the Patterson I knew wouldn't casually discuss eliminating people for mining rights." The room grew tense. Williams set down his wine glass and fixed Marcus with a hard stare. "The Patterson you knew was constrained by rules written by politicians who never faced real threats," he said. "Out here, we can do what needs to be done." "Who decides what needs to be done?" "Our clients. People with legitimate interests who are willing to pay for effective solutions." Marcus shook his head. "And if your clients' interests conflict with your country's interests?" "Our country abandoned us long before we left official service," Jenkins said bitterly. "How many operations were canceled for political reasons? How many times were we told to stand down when we could have prevented disasters? The government uses soldiers when it's convenient and discards them when it's not." It was an old argument, one that Marcus had heard during his own dark moments of doubt. The frustration of operating under political constraints, the anger at seeing missions fail due to bureaucratic interference, the sense that soldiers were expendable assets in political games. But it was also a dangerous philosophy that justified abandoning all moral and legal constraints in pursuit of operational effectiveness. "I need some air," Marcus said, standing up from the table. He walked out to the Manor's terrace, where the evening air was cool and clean. The Cotswolds stretched out before him, peaceful English countryside that seemed far removed from the conversations happening inside. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "Hope your weekend is going well. Call me when you get back." The simple message from his sister brought clarity to his confused thoughts. Sarah represented the normal world, the civilian life he was protecting through his service. The men inside represented a different path, one that led away from accountability and toward private warfare. "Deep thoughts?" asked a voice behind him. Marcus turned to find Blackwood approaching with 2 glasses of brandy. "Just processing everything," Marcus replied, accepting one of the glasses. "Your friends are concerned about your reaction. They were hoping for a more enthusiastic reunion." "They're not my friends anymore. They're something else." Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. "Death changes people. Even fake death. When you cut ties with your old life completely, it's easier to adopt new moral frameworks." "Is that what this is? A new moral framework?" "It's a practical approach to an impractical world," Blackwood said. "Traditional institutions are failing to address emerging threats. We provide solutions that work." Marcus sipped his brandy, thinking about the conversation inside. At what cost? Everything has costs. The question is whether the benefits justify them. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Blackwood spoke again. "You're different from the others, Thompson. They were angry when they came to us, frustrated with constraints, disappointed by bureaucracy, ready to embrace new approaches. You're not angry. You're sad." It was an perceptive observation. Marcus was sad. For his friends who had chosen this path. For the innocence that had been lost. For the simple moral clarity of his earlier military service. "What happens if I walk away?" Marcus asked. "You return to your ceremonial duties and pretend this weekend never happened. Your friends will be disappointed, but they'll understand. And if I stay, you become part of something bigger than yourself. You use your skills to solve problems that governments can't or won't address. You help your old teammates complete missions that matter." Marcus drained his brandy and set the glass on the terrace railing. "I'll need time to decide." "Of course. But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't remain open indefinitely." As they walked back inside, Marcus realized that his real mission was complete. He had learned what Blackwood Security was doing, identified the personnel involved, and gathered intelligence about their operations. The question now was what to do with that information. The evening concluded with promises to stay in touch and invitations to return for additional discussions. Marcus exchanged contact information with his former teammates. Each conversation weighted with the knowledge that their paths had diverged permanently. The drive back to London passed in darkness, both literal and metaphorical. Marcus's phone contained enough recorded conversations and digital evidence to shut down Blackwood Security and arrest most of its personnel. But using that evidence would also destroy the men who had once been his brothers. By the time he reached his apartment, Marcus had made his decision. Sunday morning brought a call from Colonel Harrison, eager to hear about the weekend's discoveries. "Quite enlightening," Marcus reported. "Blackwood Security is definitely engaged in activities that would concern government oversight. They're recruiting former Special Forces personnel for operations that exist in legal gray areas." "How serious are we talking about?" "Serious enough to warrant investigation by appropriate authorities." "But sir, there's something else. Some of the personnel they've recruited are men who were officially declared killed in action." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "Are you certain?" "I saw them myself. Spoke with them. They're very much alive and working for Blackwood. This is larger than we anticipated. You'll need to provide a full debrief to intelligence services." 17. "Understood, sir. But I'd like to request one thing." "What's that?" "When the investigation proceeds, I'd like to remain involved. These men were my teammates. If there's a way to bring them back into legitimate service rather than simply arresting them, I think it's worth attempting." Harrison agreed. And over the following weeks, Marcus found himself working with government intelligence services to build a case against Blackwood Security while simultaneously exploring options for his former teammates. The operation that followed was complex and delicate. Rather than simply arresting Blackwood and his personnel, authorities decided to allow the organization to continue operating under surveillance while feeding them false intelligence and monitoring their activities. Marcus's role evolved from undercover operative to double agent, maintaining contact with his former unit while reporting their activities to government handlers. It was emotionally exhausting work that required him to balance loyalty to old friendships with duty to his country. The resolution came 6 months later, when Blackwood Security attempted to conduct an unauthorized operation in Syria that would have resulted in significant civilian casualties. Government forces intervened at the last moment, using intelligence provided by Marcus to prevent the attack and arrest the personnel involved. Jenkins, Patterson, and the others were given a choice: prosecution for their illegal activities, or return to legitimate military service under close supervision. All of them chose the latter. Recognizing that their experiment in private warfare had ultimately led them away from the values they had originally sworn to uphold, Marcus continued his duties as a Queen's Guard, but with a new understanding of the importance of his ceremonial role. Standing watch outside Buckingham Palace was not just about protecting the monarchy. It was about upholding the principles that separated legitimate government authority from private force. The red uniform and bearskin hat no longer felt like a costume or camouflage. They represented a commitment to serve something larger than himself, to operate within legal and moral constraints, even when those constraints made the job more difficult. 1 year later, as Marcus stood at his post during a summer morning shift, he reflected on the events that had transformed his understanding of duty and service. His skills as a Special Forces operative remained sharp, but they were now tempered by wisdom gained through difficult choices and complex moral decisions. A familiar figure approached through the crowd of tourists. Jenkins, now serving with distinction in a regular army unit, paused near the palace gates and caught Marcus's eye. A slight nod passed between them, acknowledgement of shared history and renewed purpose. That evening, Marcus called Sarah to confirm their weekly dinner plans. "You sound different," she observed. "More settled somehow." "I think I've figured out what I'm protecting and why," Marcus replied. Good. That's been a long time coming. As he hung up the phone, Marcus looked once more at the photograph of his old SAS unit. Some of the faces belonged to men who had temporarily lost their way but found it again. Others belonged to men who had made the ultimate sacrifice in service of their country. All of them, in their own ways, had helped him understand that being the deadliest sniper in the SAS was less important than being a guardian of the values worth protecting. The red uniform represented more than ceremony. It represented the choice to serve with honor, even when easier paths were available. Marcus Thompson, Queen's Guard and former SAS operative, had found his purpose at last. And in protecting that purpose, he protected everything that made the protection worthwhile.